ऑफ कॉम्प्युटर्स कॉम्प्युटरच्या सुरुवातीच्या In early days of computers, people communicated with them by on and off switches denoting primitive instructions. ओके, ज्यावेळेस कॉम्प्युटरचा शोध लागला त्यावेळेस युजर्स कम्युनिकेशन ऑन आणि ऑफ स्विचेस हे ऑन आणि ऑफ स्विचेस साठी प्रायमरी इन्स्ट्रक्शन्स डिनोट करत दाखवत होते. प्रायमरी इन्स्ट्रक्शन्स देत होते, त्याच्यानुसार ते ऑन किंवा ऑफ. Then people wanted to give more complex instructions. For example, if you want to solve the mathematical expressions such as x is equal to 30 into y, if y is equal to 10, then what is the value of x? जर कॉम्प्लेक्स एक्झाम्पल जर सोडवायचे असतील, समजा x इज इक्वल टू 30 गुणिले y आणि y बरोबर 10 असेल तर x ची व्हॅल्यू किती, x ची किंमत किती. सो प्रेझेंट डे कॉम्प्युटर्स कॅनॉट अंडरस्टँड सच लँग्वेज without aid of the system programs. So system programs in which includes compilers, loaders, macros, processors, operating systems, and this type of system programs were developed to make computers better adapted to the needs of their users. So further, people wanted more assistance in the mechanics of preparing their programs. System program ही compiler, loader, macro processors and operating system यांनी बनलेली आहे. हे सगळे चारही पाचही पॉइंट्स जे काय आहेत, कंपायलर, लोडर, मॅक्रो, प्रोसेसर, ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम, सगळं सिलेबसला आहे. या प्रत्येक पॉइंट वरती एक चॅप्टर आहे आणि या सगळ्याचा वापर करून सिस्टम प्रोग्रामिंग बनलेली आहे. त्याच्यानंतर लोकांना आणखी मदतीची आवश्यकता लागली की ज्यामध्ये त्यांचे प्रोग्राम्स ते तयार करू शकतील. So compilers are system programs. Compilers are system programs that accept people like language and translate into them machine language. So compiler is such a type of program which accept the user's language and translate into them machine level language. Compiler compile the given code by the user and translate into machine level language. Machine level language is a binary code which stores a data in 0 and 1 format. Then loaders. Loaders are systems that prepare machine language programs. Loaders are the programs Loaders are the programs that prepare machine language programs for executions. So which prepare a language for execution. Then whenever ज्यावेळेस तुमचा प्रोग्राम एक्झिक्यूट होईल त्यावेळेस युजरला डिस्प्ले करण्यासाठी दाखवण्यासाठी लोडर परत बायनरी कोड टू user level language मध्ये कन्वर्ट करतो. That macro processors allows programmers to use abbreviations. Abbreviation म्हणजे छोटे छोटे फॉर्म्स. मॅक्रो प्रोसेसर हा प्रोग्रामरला और किंवा युजरला छोटे छोटे फॉर्म्स शॉर्ट वर्ड्स हा यूज करायला परवानगी देतो. फॉर एक्झाम्पल इंटिजरच्या बाबतीत तुम्हाला सांगितलं होतं INTEGER पूर्ण न वर्ड वापरता आपण INT वापरतो किंवा कॅरेक्टरच्या बाबतीत CHAR वापरतो, पूर्ण आपण वर्ड वापरत नाहीत. So operating systems and file systems allow flexible storing and retrieval of information as shown in this figure. See the figure carefully. That is, observe figure carefully. Okay. See at the top there is a user or people, then which want to execute programs, that is application programs. For execution of application programs there is a requirement of compiler, then assembler, then macro processor. Compiler, assembler, and macro processor. For assembler requires a text editors and debugging aids. Text editors and debugging aids. For text editors requires file system, scheduling algorithms. Then for debugging aids requires libraries and memory management. Similarly, here for compiler requires loader and text editors. Then loaders requires input output programs and file systems. Same for macro processors requires debugging aids, then scheduling and sorting, searching and sorting. Then debugging aids requires, that is, libraries and memory management. And searching and sorting also requires memory management and device management. So all are dependent on each other. So there are, suppose 1 lakh computers used in now virtually for every application. So the productivity of each computer is heavily dependent on effectiveness, efficiency, and sophistication, that is user friendly of the system programs. Okay, why I am asking a question, why are you using a Windows 10 operating system rather than Windows XP, Windows NT, Windows 93, whatever? The reason is that the recent computers are developed from previous one, but the advantage of recent computers as effectiveness, efficiency, and user friendly. That's why we are using a recent technology. Recent technology reduces the human efforts, reduces the time. So the productivity of each computer is depend on the productivity of each machine is depend on effectiveness, efficiency, and user friendly of system programs. Then this is a machine structure. See in this figure, memory is divided into a number of parts such as IO processors. IO processors regarding IO processor regarding data type, card, read or punch, printers, teletype, or memory management regarding with a CPU. So memory is a device where information is stored. So processors are devices that operate on these informations. Processors are the device that operate on these information. One may view information as being stored in ones and zeros. कोणतीही माहिती हे मेमरीमध्ये, दॅट इज स्मृतीमध्ये, वन आणि शून्य, एक आणि शून्य, वन आणि झिरो या दोन फॉर्म मध्ये स्टोअर केलेली जाते. अँड each one and zero is called as separate binary digit known as a bit. So beats are typically grouped in units called as words, characters or bytes. So memory locations are specified by addresses where each address identifies a specific byte, word or character. Memory locations are specified by addresses. कुठलंही मेमरी लोकेशन हे त्याच्या ऍड्रेस वरून ओळखलं जातं आणि प्रत्येक ऍड्रेसला ते एकतर बाईट मध्ये असतं किंवा वर्ड मध्ये असतं किंवा कॅरेक्टर मध्ये असतं. So the content of word may be interpreted as a data or instructions. A processor is a device that performs a sequence of operations specified by instructions in memory. A processor is a device that performs a sequence of operations specified instructions in memory. And a program or procedure is a sequence of instructions. So memory may be thought as a mailbox containing group of ones or zeros. Below we depict a series of memory locations whose addresses are 10,000 to 10,002. So this is the table which contains address and contents. So address 10,000, then contents is this, that is 4 times 15 times 0 and 1, then 10,001, then contents is 2 times 0, then 1 2 times 1, then 12 times 0, then 10,002, then 13 times 0, then 100. So memory may be throughout of mailboxes containing group of zeros and ones. Below we depict a series of memory locations whose addresses are 10,000 through 10,002. And IBM, it is a company, and IBM 1130, that is 1130 is a processor number treating a location 10,001 as instruction would be interpreted as it contains halt instruction. So the location in memory 10,001 is known as a halt instruction. Similarly, treating the same location as a numerical data, the processor interpreted as a binary number such as 2 times 1, 2 times 0, 2 times 1 and 12 times 0, that is a decimal number is 12,288, and these instructions and data shared with same storage medium. So information in memory is coded into groups. स्मृतीमधली माहिती हे कोडमध्ये एकत्रित केली जाते in the form of bits, and that may be interpreted as a characters, instructions or number. So what is a code? A code is a set of roles or rules or instructions. It is a set of rules that for interpreting groups of bits. Suppose for representing decimal digits, so it is known as BCD, binary coded to a binary conversion to decimal. किंवा बायनरी कोड to decimal. Then characters A, B, C, D, I, C or ASCII. So ASCII is American Standard Code for Information Interchange for instructions, that is specific processor operations codes. So we have depicted two types of processors: input output processors and a central processing unit. We have seen in previous figure. Here there are two types of processors: input output processor and a central processing units. So the input output processors are concerned with a transfer of data between memory and peripheral devices such as a disk, drum, printers, typewriters. So input output processors, it is a transfer data between memory to different types of peripheral devices such as a disk, a drum, printer, typewriters. So the CPUs are concerned with manipulation of data stored in memory. The CPUs are concerned with manipulation of data stored in memory. The input output processors execute input output instructions that are stored in memory. So the CPUs are concerned with manipulation of data stored in memory. The input output processors execute input output instructions that are stored in memory and is generally activated by command from the CPU, central processing unit. So typically this consists of execute IO, that is execute input output instruction whose argument is the address of the start of the input output program. The CPU interprets these instructions. The CPU interprets these instructions and passes the argument to the IO processor, called commonly known as IO channels. ओके, ज्या इनपुट आउटपुट प्रोसेसरच्या इन्स्ट्रक्शन्स ज्या स्मृतीमध्ये स्टोअर केलेल्या आहेत, जतन करून ठेवलेल्या आहेत, त्या कॉमनली ऍक्टिव्हेट हा सीपीयू कडून केल्या जातात. सो इट कन्सिस्ट ऑफ एक्झिक्यूट आयओ इन्स्ट्रक्शन्स. ज्यावेळेस इनपुट आउटपुट इन्स्ट्रक्शन्स एक्झिक्यूट होतं की ज्याचे आर्ग्युमेंट्स द ऍड्रेस ऑफ दॅट, म्हणजे आर्ग्युमेंट हे ऍड्रेस ऑफ द input and output programs. So central processing unit interprets these instructions and pass to the argument so that input and output instructions execute by the input and output processors. It gives the instructions to the input output processor for the execution of that input output instruments, that is typewriter, printer, disk, debugger. So input output instruction set may be entirely different from central processing unit and may be executed asynchronously or simultaneously with CPU operation. इनपुट आउटपुट इन्स्ट्रक्शन्स ह्या सीपीयू इन्स्ट्रक्शन पासून पूर्ण वेगळे आहेत आणि इनपुट आउटपुट इन्स्ट्रक्शन्स या सायमल्टेनियसली एकत्रितपणे कुणाबरोबर सीपीयू ऑपरेशन बरोबर एक्झिक्यूट होतात. What is asynchronous operation? So asynchronous operation of IO channel and CPU was one of the earliest form as multiprocessing. Asynchronous operation is known as a multiprocessing. So multiprocessing means having more than one processor operating on same memory simultaneously. एकापेक्षा जास्त प्रोसेसेस एकाच वेळी स्मृतीमधून ऑपरेट केल्या जातात. त्याला मल्टीप्रोसेसिंग म्हणायचं. Since instructions like data are stored in memory and can be treated as by changing the bit configuration of the instruction. Since instructions like data are stored in memory and can be treated data by changing bit configuration of instructions, adding a number to it, we may change it to a different instruction. Then procedures that modify themselves called as impure procedures. ज्या प्रोसिजर्स स्वतःला बदल करून घेतात स्वतःच त्या impure procedures असतात. The procedures that modify themselves called as impure procedures. So while writing such procedures is a poor programming, writing such procedures is poor programming practice. So other programmers find them difficult to read and moreover they cannot be shared by multiple procedures modifiers its contents. So other programmers find them difficult to read and moreover they cannot be shared by multiple procedures modifiers its contents. So other processor attempting to execute the same procedure, other processor attempting to execute the same procedure may encounter different instructions or a data. Other processor attempting to execute same procedure may encounter different instructions or data. Thus, impure procedures are not readily reusable. A pure procedure may does not modify itself, while impure procedure modify itself or themselves. So pure procedure does not modify itself to ensure that instructions are same each time a program is used. Impure procedures ह्या स्वतःच्या स्वतःला बदलून घेऊ शकतात आणि अशा वेळी प्रोग्राम लिहिताना प्रोग्रामरला वाचणं किंवा लिहिणं खूप अवघड जातं आणि त्यामुळं ते मल्टी प्रोसिजर्स म्हणजे जास्तीत जास्त प्रोसिजर्स मॉडिफाय करू शकत नाहीत शेअर करू शकत नाहीत त्याच्याबरोबर. जर इम्प्युअर प्रोसिजर्स हा स्वतःला कधीच मॉडिफाय करत नाहीत करू शकत नाहीत की ज्यामुळं इन्स्ट्रक्शन्स ह्या प्रत्येक वेळी ह्या प्रोग्राम मध्ये वापरल्या जातात. प्युअर प्रोसिजर्स आर एम्प्लॉयड ऑर रिइन्ट्रंट परत परत वापरल्या जातात. So what is the evaluation of component of programming system? प्रोग्रामिंग सिस्टमचे इव्हॅल्युएशन कुठले कुठले आहेत? तर फर्स्ट असेंबलर, सेकंड लोडर, थर्ड मॅक्रोज, फोर्थ कंपायलर अँड फिफ्थ फॉर्मल systems. तर we are going to see these 5 points in detail. First is assembler. Let us review some aspects of development of component of programming system. We move towards before going to assembler. We move towards the some points of development of component programming system. At one time, the computer program had at its disposal the basic machine that interpreted through hardware certain fundamental instructions. So, एका वेळी the computer programmer, that is the user, you had at its disposal basic machine interpreted. It will dispose he will dispose the basic machine that interpreted through hardware and with some certain fundamentals, some specific basic instructions. So he would program this computer by writing series of one or zeros. That is, the user should write the programs in computer in the series of 0 or 1, that is in machine level language, so that the place them into memory of the machine and press button whereupon a computer could start to interpret that instructions. युजरनं स्मृतीमध्ये 01 फॉर्मॅटचा प्रोग्राम जर लिहिला 01 फॉर्मॅटमध्ये आणि बटन प्रेस केलं की कॉम्प्युटर हा इंटरप्रेट इन्स्ट्रक्शन्स रीड करायला दिलेल्या सूचना वाचायला चालू करू शकतो. सो whenever a computer programmer with a basic machine interpreted through hardware and some basic instructions, so that whenever user should have should return the program in the form of 0 and 1, that is in machine level language, then press a whenever he has pressed a button, then the machine start to interpret that instructions, so that programmer found difficult to write or read the programs in machine language. मशीन लेवल लँग्वेज मध्ये जो प्रोग्राम 01 फॉर्म मध्ये आहे तो प्रोग्रामरला डिफिकल्ट जाणार आहे. सो व्हॉट इज द क्वेश्चन? फॉर मोर कन्व्हिनियंट लँग्वेज or for the communication, they can use a mnemonic, that is a symbolic form for each machine instructions. सिम्बॉलिक फॉर्म मध्ये कम्युनिकेशन होऊ शकतं, which they would subsequently translate into the machine language, and such mnemonic machine language is known as assembly language. The communication in between machine and man or machine and the person in the form of symbols, and such a symbolic language is known as assembly language, and the programs known as assembles or assemblers, and that programs are written to automate a translate of assembly language into machine level language. So assembler assembles that code into from user level language to the machine level language. So the input of assembler program is called as a source program and output of machine language is called as object program. Whenever a person want to communicate with machine with the form of some symbolic form in the form of symbol, and that language is known as mnemonic machine language, and such language is known as assembly language. And these assembly language performs machine level language performs the communication between user and the machine. So from person's language to the machine language assembles that language, and input of assembler program is known as a source program, whereas the output of machine language is known as object program. So we have seen what is assemblers, then move towards what is loaders. Once the assembler produces the object program, the program must be placed into memory and executed. Whenever the assembler take input from source and assembles the language and produces the output as object program, and that program is stored into memory for the execution. It is a purpose of loader to assure that object programs are placed in memory in executable form. Whenever the output of object assemble the output of assembler is object program is placed into memory, then the work of loader to execute the programs which are placed in memory to perform the executable form of the programs which are stored in the memory. The assembler could place the object program directly in the memory without causing language program to execute. So, however, this would waste core by leaving the assembler in memory by the user's program was being executed. So, this requires more time while leaving the assemble program into the memory. So also programmer would have to retranslate his program with execution, thus the wasting translation time. So for the reducing wasting translation time, whenever program gives the into the machine, programmer gives the program to the machine for the assembler, for the loader. While loading the program, it requires sometimes for reducing that specific time, programmer retranslate his program with execution. So to overcome this problem of wasted translation time and wasted memory, system programmers developed another component as a loader. What is a loader? Loader is a program that places programs into the memory which prepares for execution of instructions which are given by the user. Loader, it is a program. Loader, it is a program that is a, that places the programs into the memory and prepares the execution for the programs. In simple loading scheme, assembler output the machine language translation. In simple loading scheme, while loading, the assembler output, that is objective output, which are given by the assembler to the machine language of program and secondary store device. The loader is placed in core, or the loader is placed in core memory or cache memory or buffer memory. So the loader places into memory the machine language version of user's program, transfer control to it. Okay, while writing a program, user writes his program into 01 format and placed into memory. While executing these instructions, there may be pure or impure data. So how to recognize which is impure data or which is pure data? So user gives or writes his program through assembler, so that assembler convert that given code in assembling format, and that is known as object, which will be stored in memory, so that loader can these load this program, or the stored program loader can perform a executable form of that program. So loader places into memory the machine language versions users program and transfer control to it. Such loader programs are much smaller than assembler. Loader programs are much smaller than assembler, and it takes more core available from users program. So the realization of many users while writing virtually same programs. The realization of many users were writing virtually the same programs lead to the development of ready-made programs or packages, and these packages were written by computer manufacturers or users. So as the programmers become more sophisticated or user friendly, so users want to mix and combine the ready-made programs with his own programs. Whenever the company manufactures the packages which are written by the programmers, which are ready-made, so whenever such programs will be manufactured, then he want to that programs mix and combine his own programs and ready-made programs. So in response to demand this, a facility was developed whereby user could write main program that is used by several other programs and subroutines. For example, while writing a C program, you can use a function which will be used or which is going to use more times. We can call more times for execution of that code. So similarly, main program is different and function is a different. Whenever user want to execute his program with ready-made ready program, then user can combine or mix these two programs and as per requirement this facility is provided by loading, compiling and loading. Then subroutine. Subroutine is a body of computer instruction. It is a body of computer instructions designed to be or used by designed to be used by other routines to accomplish a task. For completing a task, subroutine is used and subroutine is designed by other use of routines. Subroutine is a part of routine and it is a body of computer instructions. There are two types of subroutines: closed subroutine and open subroutine. The open subroutine is one whose code is inserted into main program. The open subroutine or macro definition whose code is inserted into main program, and if the same open subroutine called four times, it will appear in four different places in the calling program. Open subroutine, it is our macro definition whose code is inserted in main program. Whenever such subroutine or macro definition is used 4 to 5 times in the same program, it will appear differently 4 to 5 times in that program. And closed subroutine is called as a stored outside of a closed subroutine can be stored outside of main routine and control transfers to the subroutine and control transfers to the subroutine. So associated with closed subroutine, there are two tasks the main program must perform: transfer of control and transfer of data. There are two types of tasks to transfer of control and transfer of data with closed subroutines. So initially, closed subroutines had to be loaded into memory at a specific address. Initially, closed subroutine had to be loaded in memory with specific address. For example, if a user want to employ a square root of subroutine, then he would have to write a main program that would transfer location assigned square root of routine. Suppose one user want to take a square root of subroutine, then he should have to write a programming regarding this operation so that it will transfer the location assigned to square root routine, that is sqrt, sq for square, rt for root. So his program and subroutine would be assembled together. If a second user want to use a same subroutine and he also would assemble it along with his own program, then the complete machine language translate into loaded memory would be loaded into memory. Suppose a user want to use a same subroutine and he also would assemble along with his own program, then all then the complete machine language translate would be loaded into memory. See, this is the example of core allocation, which is inflexible loading scheme and depicted in this figure, or which is shown in this figure. Suppose this is in left side, this is the first user, right side is the another user. In left side, There is some space between sqrt and program 1. Here, first user want to take a square root of this subroutine, then he should have to write a program regarding to this square root of subroutine so that he can get his required answer. But while in second case, see in right side of the figure, in second case there is another programmer who want to execute his program with the square root subroutine program so that it can assemble, and this time space is reduced. Here a time space of execution of these two programs is maximum as compared to second, and this is the core allocation for absolute loading. It requires less time. In case of second, it requires less time as compared to first, because at a time two programs execute, whereas here two separate programs execute. While executing separate programs, it requires more time to loading, whereas the mm, execution of programs at a time, it requires or it reduces time of loading. So program 1 has a hole in core, and program 2 is overlays, and they destroy the part of square root routine. The programmers want to use subroutines that are referred to each other symbolically and did not want to be concerned with address of the parts of their programs. They expected a computer system to assign locations to other subroutines and substitute addresses their symbolic responses. Before going to onwards, before going to onwards, I want to from answer from your side. Have you understood? Have you any doubt? If you have any doubt, please ask frankly. If you not understood any part, you can ask frankly. तुम्हाला जर एखादा भाग समजला नसेल तर तुम्ही विचारू शकता. The system programmers noted that it would be more efficient if subroutines could be translated into object form that loader could relocate directly behind the user's program. The task of adjusting programs so they may be placed in arbitrary core locations called as relocations. So relocating loaders from there are four functions. Relocating loaders perform four functions. First, allocate a space memory for programs, that is allocation. Then linking, that is the resolve symbolic references between object decks. Then third, relocation, adjust all address dependent locations such as address constants to correspond to the allocated space. Physically place the machine instructions and data into memory loading. There are these four functions. First, allocation. Second, linking. Third, reallocation. And fourth, loading. That is whenever program enter in the memory, so allocate particular space in that memory for the programs. Then linking of two different programs or two different objects with the symbolic reference, that is linking. Third, adjust address a dependent locations such as address constants to correspond the address space, that is a relocation. And fourth is loading, that is physical space or place of machine instructions and data into the memory, that is loading. So there are various types of loaders that we will going to discuss, such as compile and go, absolute, then relocating, direct linking, dynamic loading, and dynamic linking. So differ primarily in the manner in which these four basic functions are accomplished. So the time of execution of a user's program is called as execution time. Definition of execution time is a time required to execute a user's program, that is known as execution time. And the time of translation of user's source program is called as assembly or compile time load, where the translation of the time required for translation of user source code is called assembly time or compile time. And this load time refers the time of loading and preparing object programs for execution. We have seen loaders, then move towards the macros. So macros are to relieve programmers of need to repeat identical part of their program. Operating system provide macro processing facility which permits the programmer to define the abbreviation for a part of his program and to use the abbreviation in his program. So whenever to relieve programmers need to repeat identical part of programming, for repeating the part of identical part of programming, operating system provide a macro processing facility for repeating for identical repeating for repeating identical part of program. Operating system provide a macro processing facility which provides or which permits programmer to define abbreviation as part of his program, to use abbreviation in his program. So macro processor treat the identical part of this program and defined by abbreviation as a macro definition that saves the definition. The macro processor subtitles define for all occurrences of abbreviation. The macroprocessor substitutes the definition of all occurrences of abbreviations, that is known as macro call. The macroprocessor substitutes or replaces a definition for all occurrences of abbreviations, and in addition to help programmers abbreviate their programs, macro facilities have been used as general text handlers for specifying operating system to individual computer installations. So in case of macroprocessor, for example, in C language, you are using hash a define max is equal to 25. You are using here a definition of max is equal to 25. Whenever you are writing that is a define hash define max is equal to 25, then in programming there is no need to write max is equal to 25. Once you have defined before the main what is the value of max, then there is no need to define again in the program max is equal to 25, and this is known as a macro processors or macro programming or abbreviation, that is the macro call. So in specializing operating system, that is system generation, the entire operating system is written as a series of macro definitions. While preparing a new operating system, there are in that operating system there are series of macro definitions, and to specialize these operating system there are different macro calls, and these are processed by macroprocessors by substituting appropriate definitions, thereby producing the programmers for an operating system. Then we are going to learn compilers. Up till now we have studied assemblers, loaders and macros. Then we move towards compilers. So what is a compiler? As users problem become more categorized into areas such as a scientific, business and a statistical problems, specialized languages such as high level languages were developed that allowed the user to express a certain problems consciously and easily. Users problems became more categorized as areas such as scientific, business and statistical problems. These high level languages examples are Fortran, COBOL, Algol, then PLI are processed by compilers and interpreters. So what is a compiler? Compiler is a program that accepts program written in high level language and produces the object program. The high level language written program which accepts that program and produces object program is known as a compiler. As interpreter is an program that appears to execute a source program as if they were machine language. So compiled program, interpreter for executing source program, interpreter interprets, that is compiles into the machine language. Same name that is Fortran, COBOL, etc., is often used to designate both compiler and its associated languages. Modern compilers must be able to provide complex facilities that programmers now are demanding whenever as per requirement of users. So modern compilers would be able to complex facilities. So compiler must furnish complex accessing methods for pointers, variables, data structures used in different languages like PLI, COBOL or Algol 68. So modern compilers must be close interact closely with operating system that handle the statement concerning the hardware interpret of the computer. So up till now we have studied four parts. Now move last part of this programming system, that is a formal system. What is a formal system? Formal system is uninterpreted calculus. It is uninterpreted calculus. It consists of an alphabet, a set of words called as axioms, and finite set of relations called rules of inference. So examples of formal system are set theory, Boolean algebra, post systems, or Backus normal form, that is BNF. So formal systems are becoming important in designing, implementation, and study of programming languages. Specifically, they can be used to specify syntax for and semantics meaning of programming language. They have been used in syntax directed compilation, compiler verification, and complexity studies of languages. Then a next part is evaluation of operating system. Just a few years ago, a Fortran programmer would approach the computer with his source deck in his left hand and a green deck cards in that would be Fortran compiler in his right hand. He would found that place the Fortran compiler, that is Greek deck, in card hopper and press load button. Then computer would load the Fortran compiler. Then place his source language a deck the card hopper. Then Fortran compiler would proceed to translate it into machine language text and which was punched outward red cards. Whenever the programmer reach into the card library and for pink card of the pink deck of cards marked as a loader and place them in card hopper, then computer would load the loader into its memory. So place his newly translated object deck into the card hopper. The loader would load it into the machine. Place the card hopper the decks of any subroutine of his program called. Then loader would be load these subroutines. Finally, loader would transfer execution of user's program might require reading of data cards. Here, one experiment has been done by Fortran programmer. First, he placed his a green card or green deck card in card hopper. Then that computer load that Fortran compiler. Then he plays another card from, so that card also compiled and load into the memory. Then he placed his newly translated object deck card into the card hopper. Then the loader load into the machine, and he has done so many experiments. Finally, the loader would translate execution of the user's program, and which might require loading of data cards, and such system of multi-card decks was somewhat unsatisfactory. There was a strong motivation for moving to a more flexible system. So one reason that valuable computer time was being wasted as machines stood ideal during card handling activities and between the jobs. So there requires more times so that the eliminate for overcome this time wasting of time, the facilities batch operating system was provided for permitting number of jobs. First operating system is a batch operating system, and batch operating system performed the task of batch batching the jobs. For example, a batch operating system performs a task of batching system. For example, the batch system would perform steps 1 to 6. So retrieving the Fortran compiler, the loader from secondary storage. So as a demand of computer or uh, computer time, memory devices and files increases. So reducing time, reducing memory size, and increase reducing file size, so efficient management of these resources become more critical, and these resources are valuable, and inefficient management of them can be costly. So management of each so the management of each resource has evolved as cost and user friendly of the use increases. That is sophistication. In simple batch system, memory resources was allocated to a single program. Thus, if a program did not need entire memory, the portion of resource was wasted. So multi-programming operating system was partitioned. Core memory was developed in circumvent circumvent this problem. That is to overcome this problem. Whenever I require some specific memory and a remaining memory is wasted. So for overcome this problem, multi-programming operating system is developed. So multi-programming allows multiple programs at a time to reside separate areas of the core. So programmers were given fixed portion, that is multi-programming with fixed tasks with a varying size of partition portion, that is multi-programming with variable tasks. Often such partitioned memory programs, some portions could not be used since it was too small to contain a program. The problem of holes or unused partitions of core is called as fragmentation, and fragmentation has been minimized by technique of reallocate partitions and by paging. In multiprogramming, there may be unused memory. That unused memory is known as fragmentation, and that fragmentation has been minimized by the technique of reallocation partitions and by paging. So relocatable partitions core allows unused partitions condensed into the continuous part of the core. And paging, it is a method of memory allocation by which the program is subdivided into equal partitions or equal pages. It is a method of memory allocation by which programs are subdivided into equal parts or equal pages, and core is subdivided equal partitions or blocks. Such pages are loaded into the blocks. There are two paging techniques, simple and demand paging techniques. In simple paging, all pages of program must be a core of the system. A simple paging technique, all pages of the program must be core for execution, and demand paging of program can be executed without all pages being core. Pages are fetched into the core as they needed, and the traffic controller contains the process processors and processes. The resource of the processor time is allocated by program known as a scheduler. The resource of processor time is allocated by program is known as a scheduler. The processor concerned with input output references. The processor concerned with input output referred to as input output processor, and the programming with this processor is called as IO programming or input output programming. Similarly, the processor concerned with a CPU referred as CPU, and programming regarding this CPU is called as simple programming, and the programming regarding with input output processor is called as input output process programming. The resources of files of information is allocated by input output system. A segment is a group of information that user want to treat an entity. Files are the segments, and there are two types of files such as directory and data or programs. Directory contains location of other files. In hierarchical file system, directories may point to other directories, in which turn may point to directories of files. So there is another operating system is a time sharing operating system. It is a typically characterized by interactive processing or time slicing of the CPU's time to allow quick response to each other. The virtual memory, that is the namespace address space, which consists of these addresses that may be generated by a processor during execution of the computation. The memory space consists of the set of addresses. The memory space consists of set of addresses that correspond to the physical memory locations, and the technique of segmentation provides large namespace and good protection mechanisms. Protection and sharing are methods of allowing controlled access to segments. Then next point is operating system as per user's viewpoint is known as functions. So from the user's point of view, the purpose of operating system is to assist or to help the user in the mechanics of solving problems. The use of operating system is to help to the user for the solving problem. Specifically, the following functions are performed by the system. First as a job sequencing, a scheduling, traffic controller operations, then input output programming, then protecting itself from the users, protecting the user from the other users, then a secondary storage management, and next is error handling. So consider a situation in which one user has a job that takes 4 hours. A user has a job that takes 4 hours and another user has a job that takes 4 seconds. If both jobs were submitted simultaneously, it would seem to be more appropriate for the 4-second user that to have his run go first. Background considers such as these job scheduling is automatic technique performed by operating system. It is possible to input or output while simultaneously execute the program, as in the case with many computer systems. All the functions are scheduled by traffic controller. As we said, input output channels may be thought of a separate computer with its own specialized set of instructions. Most users do not want to learn how to program. That is, in many cases, a quite complicated task. The user would like to simply say his program read, causing the monitor system to supply program to the input output channel for execution. Such a facility provided by the operating system